Hello friends, welcome to CEC Live Lectures. Dear friends, today in this session we are going to continue further in our series on basic sociology. We are going to talk on social change in modern society. And for this discussion, we have with us in our studios Dr. Archana Prasad. Dr. Archana Prasad is Assistant Professor in Department of Sociology, Kamala Nehru College, University of Delhi. Friends, we know that you might have lots of questions while listening to the lecture. And if you feel so that your questions to be answered, then do call us through our toll-free number. Our number is 1800110430. I repeat, our number is 1800110430. Now, I would like to welcome our guest, Dr. Archana Prasad, and would request her to give us in-depth knowledge on this topic. Hello, ma'am. Welcome to the lecture.
Thank you, Kritika. Welcome to the series on basic sociology. And today in the series, we are going to learn about social change. Social change in modern India is something which is a very part of UPSC, IAS coaching. But when we look into the whole concept of social change, it is a very process which is very important for each one of us to understand, whether we are a student of sociology or we are a student of any other, because change is constantly taking place in society. And to understand our life, our society around, we need to understand why change takes place, how change takes place, and other components related to social change. So in today's lecture, I am going to talk about social change in terms of the way in which sociological theories have tried to understand the concept of social change. We'll look into the other kinds of processes or concepts which many a time confuse us with the whole concept of social change. And then towards the end of the lecture, I'll also talk about the ways or social changes that have taken place in our society, that is an Indian society. So let's begin with it. We try to understand what is social change, and we see that the term social change implies change in anything, be it individual, group, society or material, something which takes place over time and space. So to keep in mind, an understanding of social change implies that it is temporal, that is something which was not in the past is not the same in the present, and then it is spatial, that is in one location the certain things would be different and in another location it could take a new form. For instance, in a space, if we look into try to understand anything of how the institution of family was in United States in the 16th century and how the institution of family is today in the 21st century in India, we get a temporal spatial understanding of what changes has taken place in the institution of family. So when we look into the term social, because it consists of two important terms, social and change. So the word social can be defined in two different ways. One is it's a reference to the social structure, that is in terms of the institutions, the groups that constitute a society, and second in terms of culture. When we look into culture, culture implies a set of norms, values, ideas, beliefs or way of life, and that is that a whole idea that norms, beliefs and values of one society is different from the other society. So social actually implies both structural and cultural change. So when we are using the word social with change, it implies that we are going to make reference to the changes that has taken place in the institutions, in the structure of the society, as well as in the way of life, in the behavior, in understanding. So both the component of structure and culture together will help us to have a more holistic understanding of social change. The term is used in a very loose manner, in a wide variation in terms of process, revolution, evolution. There are large number of terms which we many a time use in place of social change, but we need, as students of sociology, keep in mind that it needs to be distinguished from the other terms. And therefore, as sociologists, what are the questions that comes into our mind? The first question is, how does social change come about? Or in other words, why did that change take place? What are the structural factors that led to the change or led to a shift in the structure and in the way of life of a particular society? The second question is that is social change inevitable? And to a large extent, in a commonsensical understanding, we would say yes, social change is inevitable, because life is dynamic, that is not statistics. People are interacting, people are bringing innovations, people are thinking, so therefore it is very pertinent that change will take place. So, we as sociologists need to understand what are the factors that promoted social change in a particular society, 1, and 2, what is the direction in which social change has taken place. So, when we try to understand what is social change, we rather try to ask the question what it is not, because it is a kind of very vague and very ambiguous kind of a term, and therefore, we bring in the whole theory given by Lapierre, who is a social is not a single event. So, and anything which is happening in one's individual life is not social change. For instance, I as an individual may or may not accept the norms of a family. It does not imply that the family has not been more patriarchal, but it is only my individual desire not to accept any of the norms of a particular patriarchal type of a family. But what is important to keep in mind, that a single event is not social change, but a single event can lead to social change, and that is from one person people will try to replicate, or people will get influenced, people will get impacted and may learn those process, and therefore it will finally lead to a kind of a change in a larger group, which will then constitute social change. For instance, even if we try to understand in terms of elections, what is a trend in an election, of a fire taking place or a meeting, these are all single events. But when we combine a series of single events, it leads to social change. The second idea is to try to differentiate between social change as a collective phenomena, as a social phenomena, and in that context we say that social change is not personal. It is more or less of what it says, it is not single event. Because if I as an individual do something, it is an individual event and it is a personal event, but it is not a social change. Social change will come in when my way of life, my behavior, my norm influences a larger circle of people, and all of them then brings about a change in a certain pattern or certain way of lifestyle or behavior pattern. And therefore, it could be leading into whole idea of if there is a change in a board of director, then there could be certain change in the office norms and regulations, but that is not social change, because it is only happening for a specific time. It is not going to take place over a long period of time, and it is not going to influence a larger public. The third idea is to differentiate between exchange of goods, information, gifts, rights and responsibility is not. These are all at the level of personal, which we are doing when we are exchanging goods or we are exchanging information, and we are not doing it on a large scale, on a wider platform, and therefore we will not bring about a change in the structure of the society. Keeping in mind in the first slide, what I said is that social change is a structural change. So, whatever will bring about a change in the structures of the society will lead to social change. Change that affects only one or few person is not social change. Socialization of an individual may lead to social change, but itself is not a social change, and that socialization, when we try to understand, is in terms of gender socialization. Many families try to bring up their daughters like boys, but it does not imply that boys will become like girls or girls will become. So, more important than that is to try to understand certain norms of gender which are considered as stereotypes. Gender stereotypes are certain ways of upbringing children which could limit her access to resources or bring about limit to her way in which is going to live her life, and that needs to be changed. So, that will lead to a kind of a change in the structure of the society, where it would be more egalitarian, a process of bringing up or socialization of both girls and boys. Then we try to understand what are the features of social change. So, as we have seen from the previous slide, that social change is not an individual phenomena. So, the first feature of social change is that it is a collective phenomena. It must affect the conditions or lifestyles or intellectual atmosphere of more than few individuals. Here, when we talk about few individual, implies a larger number. It is not just 5 or 10, but what the whole idea is to differentiate between individualistic phenomena and collective phenomena, and keeping in mind that social always implies collective. So a social change needs to be at a societal level, at a community level, at an institutional level, which will bring about a change. The second feature is it's a structural change. This is what I have been repeating 2 or 3 times, that change has to lead to about a change in the structure. Many a time we try to understand structure in a more simplistic manner in terms of a network of relation. Network of relation in the sense, in the ways in which people relate to each other, the way in which we relate to certain parts of our institutions. So those has to change in order to bring about social change. It can be, the third feature of social change is it can be identified within time. It must be able to describe sequence of all the activities within a period of time. So it is not a haphazard or a spontaneous thing which is taking place, that it happens now and it disappears in a point of time. It has to be a consistency, and there has to be a kind of a persistence also in about that today we do something and tomorrow we forget about it. That's not social change. If it is a social change, it has brought about a change in the way in which the network of relations or structure is changing, then that has to continue for a certain period of time for it to be considered or to be described as social change. The fourth is that it exists a degree of permanence. So this is coming in from this third point, that if it continues for a certain period of time implies that it has certain kind of permanence, that it is something, it's a phenomena which is going to stay in the society. It is not just like coming in the morning and it disappears in the evening. And these 4 characteristics, that is collective phenomena, structural change, time and permanency, are important to help us to understand social change in one statement, and that is social change affects the course of history of a society. And to explain it, it implies that if there is a phenomena or which can be considered as bringing about considered to be described as social change, implies that the way in which the society history or the way in which society has progressed from one time period to second time period, there is a certain kind of improvement, or there is certain kind of degradement. So change can all be both sides. It could be a positive change, it could be a negative change. So to give a simple example, we will try to look into the whole structure of family and marriage. We see that the society in a primitive simple society was a matrilineal society. Due to change in the economy, due to the change in the way in which people structured their social relation, the society moved from a matrilineal society to a patrilineal society. So the course of the history of a society was changed. Then we try to understand that there are certain sources of changes. The sources of changes can be both external and internal. Here when we are talking about internal source of change, it implies that it is taking place within the society. There are certain changes which is taking place because of the way in which people are reacting to their own life. And one of the internal source of change is innovation. And to say that innovation, because we are every day trying to improve on our life, the way in which we live our life, economy, polity, society, we are coming up with new ideas, and these new ideas help us to create better way of life. So if we look into the whole idea of mobile phone, we had first we had huge instruments which were used for making calls. It became simpler and simpler, and then we had mobiles and smartphones, and so that is kind of an innovation which is bringing about a change in the society, because it is enabling people to communicate with each other in a different manner. So what helps us in this innovation is technology. The first thing is a new technology, but technology itself does not change society. It is the way in which people would use the technology or people would respond to the technology that causes change. The second component of innovation is new culture. So beliefs and values bring about change. We start learning about certain things, we start get influenced by certain things, and we change our values and norms, and that brings about a new kind of a culture. The third component of change is new social structure. The change in roles and creation of new roles causes social change, because obviously when the cultural belief system will change the way in which people will interact with each other, or the network of relation among individuals will change, and that would lead into a change in the structure of the society. The second internal source of change is conflict. So, I already said that change is not always positive, it is also a kind of a negative thing, and negative in the sense that when change is taking place, when there are certain kind of innovations, they are different from what it was, not everybody will accept to it, not everybody will respond to it positively, and it will also not benefit every group in the same manner. So, there will be a kind of a conflict. Difference and denial of resource results in conflicts that leads to social change, and the example of conflicts are enormous. For one of the example is the civil rights movement in the 1950s, 1960s. There are a lot of conflicts which has taken place in all societies over a period of time. The third internal source of change is growth. Growth implies that there is an increase in the population of a society, which will obviously lead to change. So, when we had a subsistence mode of cultivation or agricultural, a subsistence economy, the population was limited. When the population started increasing, subsistence economy was not sufficient to meet all the needs of the population, and therefore, from subsistence it became different forms of market, different kinds of modes of production came up, and therefore, because of the increase in the size of the population, the economy from a subsistence economy to a kind of a mixed economy resulted. Then we also try to understand the external sources of social change. External sources of social changes are those that originate outside of a society, and because this is something which we get we are into a process of interaction with members of other society, we tend to get influenced by the way of life, we tend to get influenced by the structures of the society, and then we try to bring about those changes which we are part of it in other society and make it a part of our own society. One of the process of external sources of social change is diffusion. Diffusion refers to the spread of cultural trait from one group to another. It operates both within and between society. It takes place whenever societies come into contact. Diffusion means that it is spreading. It is getting diffused from one society to the other, and that is in kinds of a way of life, cultural practices are getting spread out. The second force of external source of social change is forced acculturation. Acculturation is taking into the cultural practices of another society. A social change that is imposed upon a society by a more powerful society. So, therefore, many a time one feels that my society is a kind of a lesser in hierarchy than the other society, and we adopt the process of the upper society. To take an example from the Indian society, we see that we had a process of change in terms of trying to adopt the lifestyle and cultural practices of upper caste. So, the lower caste, because they felt that they are at a lower level and their lifestyle is not adequate for them to get access to all the resources, they went into a process of adopting the lifestyle and changes of the upper caste, and this led to the demise of their own cultural practices. The third form of external source of social change is collective behavior. Often spontaneous, it is social actions that occur when people respond to new and unfamiliar cultural stimuli. That is, you are going to get into an action depending on the way in which certain cultural trait or cultural fashion fads are going to or force of entertainment becomes influential. And if we look into the whole kind of collective behavior in kind of a modern society, we try to understand the whole idea of fake news, or we try to understand the way in which message just passes from one group to the other, and it infuses inside individual a kind of a action which the entire group takes it, considering it as the correct information. Then we also try to understand the modes of social changes. Modes of social change implies patterns of action or pattern of in which the social change has occurred in society. So, there are different processes through which we try to understand the pattern of social change. The first is evolution. Evolution is a social and continuous change from simple to a complex due to internal forces within the society. So, evolution is a simple idea that all living beings will evolve from one stage to the other. From a simple society, we evolved into a complex society. From a rural society, we evolved into an agrarian industrial society. And related to evolution is progress, but it has a very definite direction. Progress is positive, that is, whatever changes takes place in the structure and the culture of the society is something which is desirable by the people, something which will fulfill the needs of the population. So, it is always trying to move on from a lower stage of societal level to a higher stage. The third is revolution. The revolution implies a kind of drastic change, an overhaul of the social system. So, for instance, when we hear the industrial revolution, it was something which they say that the agrarian system was completely removed and all were replaced by industries and urban sector. There was so much of focus on modernity, so much of focus on science and knowledge, and that is kind of bringing about a large scale change in the structure of the society. The fourth mode of pattern of social change is development. Development, like progress, implies a movement from one stage to the next, and it is obviously a progressive change. That you from a simple, if we say that from an underdeveloped economy we come a developed economy. So, there are certain criteria, there are certain standard by which it has been explained that there is a kind of a progress from a lower stage of society to a higher stage. And then the fifth is social movements. Movement is collective action. Movement implies that a large number of people are unanimously thinking about bringing about change in certain structures, certain cultural practices which are considered to be detrimental to the society. So, we have a large number of social movements in our country, from women's movement to feminist, the environment movement to the Kisan, the different kinds of movements which has taken place, and these movements take place because the existing structure or the existing cultural pattern of the society is causing certain kind of harm to a section of the society. So, those who are negatively harmed by the structures of the society will try to bring about a change, and this takes place through a collective action which then becomes a kind of a social movement. Now, we try to differentiate between some of the main concepts which often gets misunderstood with the concept of social change. The first is social evolution. Now, the evolution has come from the Latin word evolver, which means to unfold, unroll or to develop. It is a process of gradual transformation over a period of time. In sociology, the term evolution came to be used under the influence of Herbert Spencer, who gave the process of social change through evolution. Spencer's theory of organic analogy has been used to understand not only the living beings but also societal changes that has taken place. It was a kind of a modeled on the whole idea of change that takes place in living beings being used to understand how society is changing from one stage to the other. Spencer's theory was based on Darwin's notion of survival of the fittest. Darwin focused on variation in biological traits that eventuates in the creation of new species and extensions of the others. So, whosoever is more fit to get into the environment would be able to survive, the rest would have been distinct. So, those who come into being are a new generation and brings about a new kind of structure, a new kind of cultural pattern, and that implies that it is different from the earlier one. Biological principle was applied to human beings to understand change. It was the same way as organic living beings were changing from one stage to the other. For instance, if we try to understand life cycle of any butterfly and any from the eggs to the larva and the pupa, we see that is a way in which society was try to understand that it is at a very earlier stage, which is very simple. It's social relations are very simple. Everything, economy, political relations are not very developed, and then we had a complex society. So in a simple society, there was no state, there was no notion of nation, and it was a society where kinship, blood was significant for not only organizing the social relations, but it was also used to organize the economy and the political relations. Then we try to understand evolution. It is overall transformation of the society over a long period of time. Evolution is observable only from a long distance. It consists of observable and variable transformation over a shorter period of time. Social change is geographically and sociologically localized. It can usually be observed within a geographical area or within a more limited socio-cultural framework than it is possible with social evolution. So here we try to differentiate between social change and social evolution. Now when we look into the discipline of sociology, we see in the beginning an old classical sociological thinkers or all kind of theorization of society was based on the whole idea of evolution of a society. And the simplest way we try to understand our own society, we had the colonial discourse of our Indian society, which was saying that the Indian society is moving from a caste-based society to a class society. It is moving from a rural area to a city life. It is moving from a joint family to a nuclear. For the most of these, there was kind of a evolution from one level to the other. In contemporary sociologists have questioned a large number of whole understanding of evolutionary, and that help us to understand the kind of ways in which social theorists have tried to conceptualize the whole idea of how change is taking place in the society. So with this, the whole understanding of what is social change, what are different sources of social change, features, and the pattern of social change, I come to an end to the first half of the lecture on social change in modern society. Thank you.
With this note, thank you, and thank you so much for giving us this session. Friends, you are requested to be with us as we are back after a short break, and we would be continuing further and giving you more and more of the knowledge. Thank you for watching us. Hello friends, welcome back to this session. Friends, you know that today we are talking on the social changes in modern society, and for the discussion on the topic we have with us in our studios Dr. Archana Prasad. Dr. Archana Prasad is Assistant Professor in Department of Sociology, Kamala Nehru College, University of Delhi. Friends, to connect to us, you need to contact us through our toll-free number. Our number is 1-800-110-430. You are requested to call in the last 10 minutes of the lecture only, so that first you could have more and more of knowledge on the following topic. And yes, of course, in the last 10 minutes, we will try to give answers to your questions. So, Dr. Archana Prasad. Now, I would like to welcome our guest, Dr. Prasad, once again. Hello, ma'am. Welcome to the lecture.
Thank you, Gitika. Welcome back to the second half of the lecture on social change in modern society. Coming back to the trying to understand or comprehend what is social change, in this session I'll talk about basically the factors and the theories which will help us to understand the concept of social change, and if time permits we'll try to understand the nature of social change that has taken place in our Indian society. So we try to understand what actually leads to social change. Remember, in the first half of the section I said as a sociologist we need to understand what leads to social change. So factors will try to understand why change took place in the society. The first factor is demographic factor. Demographic factor in the sense of the process like fertility, mortality, migration. These are some of the demographic processes of change. Fertility in terms of birth pattern, mortality in terms of death, migration of shift of people from one location to the other location, changing age structure, that is the age structure which is the working population and the older age which is dependent on the working population, and process like age at marriage, pattern of marriage. All these process has effect on the way in which social change takes place. So we have life expectancy, use of contraceptives, levels and types of morbidity. In the developed countries of the world, the population growth is negative, that is they are under control, or it is more or less, in the other words we can say that the population is stable. But in developing countries, especially a country like India where the population explosion is taking place, it is very important to try to understand that what is the factor that has actually caused a population to explode, and what happens when the population is beyond the capacity, or it is beyond the whole idea of limiting it within the society. So when there is increase in the growth of the population, what happens? The sources which is available becomes limited in supply. So the competition and conflict over limited supply gets increases, and that leads to a change in the structure or our values and belief. For instance, when it becomes overpopulated, or we see the density of a city increases, we also see at the same time that the crime rate increases, because there is a large population which has not been able to even earn the basic earning per day. So out of frustration, out of the hunger, they start getting into a certain kind of criminal activity. So if that it has to be understood that why was an increase in the criminal activity or violent behavior in a society, it could be because of the increase in the number of people inhabiting that area. Both the trends calls about social transformation, that is whether there is an increase in the number of people living in an area or it is stable, but we have to understand that it needs to bring about social change because society is not static. The countries where fertility and mortality is low, the standard of living is high, and in the countries where it is high, the standard of living is low. And the whole idea that the standard of living is low because the demand is much less, the demand of certain consumable good or resources is much high compared to the supply of those products. Then the second factor for social change is obviously cultural factors. Cultural, as I have already said in the first half of the lecture, implies values, beliefs, ideas, institutions, norms, customs. So it could include everything, the way you talk, the way you dress, the way you, your norms, your behavioral pattern, institutions. So there are two kinds of changes, as two kinds of change in the direction in which cultural change takes place. One is that is taking place by discovery, that is new things are being discovered, new ideas are coming up, new way of living is coming up. So we have change through discovery and invention, and the second is change by diffusion and borrowing. Diffusion is in the sense that certain cultural practices are spreading across society, and borrowing that we take a trend to kind of just replicate what is happening in another society. And for a very basic commonsensical example, it could be in terms of trying to see the dressing sense of Indians. We many a time try to borrow the sense of dressing from Western country, and we try to assume that by having certain kinds of dressing sense which is more prevalent in the Western country, there is a step towards modernity. So then the distinction between tradition and modernity comes in there, where we have certain dresses which are identified as traditional dresses and certain which are considered to be more Western and more formal. So diffusion is important mechanism of social change through which one society adopts the cultural traits of another through prolonged contact in through travels, through trade. And today, because it is a global economy, information is being shared. Everything is accessible across the internet, across the computer. So in that sense, the spread of ideas, spread of certain ways of life, spread of behaviors gets a little speedier, and it becomes more diffused in a sense. And in many a time, the distinction between one kind of a society, the other, is lost in this kind of a diffusion. Then we have many thinkers who have actually focused on the cultural factors of social change, and one of them is Max Weber. Max Weber explained how ethics of Protestant religion contributed to the development of capitalism and thereby brings change in society. So Max Weber's theory was actually a theory of economy and society. He was trying to understand why economy is progressing, and to understand, he brought about the institution of religion, and he believed that certain ideas, certain ethics of Protestant religion is such that it leads to a kind of more investment, more saving, which in a very economic terms would be understood as capitalism. The second author is Mackland, who opined that some culture encourages people a need for achievement which accelerate economic development and brings change in society. So in that sense, again, cultural changes are result of the growth or economic progress of a society. The third thinker is Ogburn. He uses the concept of cultural lag. Now the term cultural lag implies that there is a kind of a gap between the material change in the material culture and the change in the non-material culture. So material culture would be in terms of technology, in terms of material goods, like change in the transports, change in the way houses are constructed, infrastructure. These are material culture. The non-materials are our beliefs and our values, which is not, to a large extent, not changing. So there could be a whole idea, if we try to explain, that material is, we see we have now access to mobile phones, and we have a lot of app for women's security, more apps being launched by many corporate sector for safety of women. But the non-material aspect is that the gender concern or the way in which we think about men and women has not changed. So it's a non-material part of the culture. As a result, there is an inconsistency between the material change and the non-material change. On what actually leads is the problem which was a part the previous will continue to take place. So that is a cultural lag that has taken place. So when we try to look into the gender concept, and we see that materially we have progressed, but in non-materially our mindset, our way of thinking has not changed. As a result, crime against women or violence of women continues to be at a higher side. Ogburn argued that non-material culture tends to change much slower than the material culture, and that this, rather it is at a very, it is falling behind the material culture, and that leads to certain kind of social problems. Then the third factor for social change is economic factor, which is, I think, is more influential factor for bringing about social change, especially in a society which is today a market-driven neoliberal society. And the most important thinkers that come to our mind to discuss economic factor of social change is none other than Karl Marx. Karl Marx believed that social change is basically the result of economic factors. His idea was that the change in the modes of production would lead to a change in the culture of the society. So the mode of the, whether it is a communal mode of production or it is a private ownership of production. So Karl Marx said that if there is a communal modes of production, that is every member of the society has an equal stage in the means of production, that is there is no distinction between the haves and the have-not, society would be kind of different from a society where there is a private means of ownership, and the modes of production which leads to economic growth and progress is in the hands of a limited few. So the haves are the capitalists who are the owners of these modes of production, and the larger mass is the have-nots who are denied any kind of rights. So there is a kind of an imbalance between the two, and a class society is formed. So he traced the development of society from an agricultural to feudalism to capitalism, and this change here, according to Karl Marx, was on the basis of change in the means of production. And in the ultimately he says that each stage has its own demerits which leads to the next stage. So there are certain problems with each stage of means of ownership of production, and that the final stage arises. And for his ultimate which has been termed as a kind of a Marxian utopia, was that the ultimate would be a revolution between the classes, that is the haves and the have-nots, or the workers and the owners of the capitalist, and because of that revolution there will be lead to a kind of an establishment of a socialist society or a kind of an egalitarian society. Then we come to the fourth factor, which is a biological factor. The biological factor may be classified into two types. The non-human biological factor includes plants and animals. They affect the lives of people in varied ways. Human biological factors, we need plants for survival. So there is a kind of a biological cycle of dependent of the human beings on the natural beings, and that cycle needs to be maintained through the process of fertility and mortality. And once this cycle gets affected due to certain resources or the non-availability of resources, it leads to a kind of a revolution in society. Different biological processes like procreation, fertility and migration cause social change. Population change has itself become a social change and factor of further social change and cultural change. And when we try to see the cycle gets affected in terms of the dependence of the human beings on plants and animals, we also see that there is a kind of problem reflected, because if there is a limitation in the resources in the plants and animal, it will have a direct replication on the availability of food, housing and all the other resources. Then the next is technological factor, and technology is one of the most important factor to understand social change which has brought about, because large number of technology has been introduced in our society, and these technology has changed the social relation from large number of ways in which the human interaction has become less because of technology. We try to see that students don't want to write with a paper and a pencil, they would click photographs of notebooks or the book that they are reading. So there is a kind of again a kind of a cultural lag in terms when we look into the technology as a factor of social change. Now, after looking into the factors of social change, we look into the theories of social change. These theories are theories which has been provided by the large number of sociological thinkers. So the first theory, which before going into the different types, the distinction can be done on two accounts. One is the direction of social change, whether it is taking in one direction or it is taking a multiple path. The second distinction is in terms of the causes of social change. So when we look into the direction of social change, we see that this social change, first form of social change is evolutionary, and the second theory of social change is cyclical theory. In the evolutionary theory, we see the unilinear theory of social change and multilinear theory of social change. So unilinear is one path of evolution from simple to complex, multilinear could be multiple paths are emerging, and cyclical is that it from one stage to the second to the third and back to the first stage. When we look into the cause of social change, we see those explaining change in terms of endogamous factors of process. Endogamic factors are process which is taking place within the society, and the second is those emphasizing on the exogamous factors such as economy, cultural or historical. The third type of causes of social change theory is deterministic theory of social change. Now, we look into these theory individually. When we look into the evolutionary theory, as I already said in the beginning, this was a theory which was influenced by Darwin's notion of biological evolution or the theory of survival of the fittest. It refers to the process by which one culture comes to dominate the other. Society go through a series of stage based and increasing complexity towards higher and more advanced stage of existence. Evolutionary process implies that society would necessarily reach new and higher levels of civilization. And after Darwin Spencer, in anthropological theory, we have the theorist called L.H. Morgan. Morgan believed that there were three basic stages in the process of society, that is savagery, barbarism and civilization. So, savagery is the lowest stage of society, it is the most underdeveloped form of society, and civilization is the highest form of evolution of society. The next thinker was Auguste Comte. He believed that human society evolved in a unilinear way, that is one line of development. So, Auguste Comte gave the unilinear theory of evolution. According to unilinear theory of social change, progress, there is a direction, there is a goal towards the society moves. He explained the evolution of society through the law of three stages of human thinking: theological or fictitious. Theological was a society which was a simple society which was influenced by supernatural religious beliefs. The second was metaphysical or abstract, and the third is the most progressed form of civilization, which is scientific or positive. In the positive stage or in the last stage of evolution of society, we see that there is lot of emphasis on science, there is lot of emphasis on positivity, that is there are certain laws which society obeys, and every society or every action of the society can be justified through rules and laws. And when we try to understand evolution, we see the society has evolved from a theological state to the scientific or positive stage. Then we have the linear theory. All society pass through the same successive stage of evolution and reach the same age. From a stage of primitive society to the advanced industrial society, all society pass through the same process of development and modernization. Herbert Spencer's theory of organic analogy believed that social structure is like a living organism which is made up of parts. The parts can be distinguished but cannot survive or exist except in relation to the whole. So, each part is dependent on the whole and each part contributes towards the functioning of the whole. That is the organic theory, organic analogy of Herbert Spencer, because he is trying to consider or compare societies and an organic, and he says the way in which an organism grows or evolves from one stage to the other, in a similar fashion society also evolves. Then we have multilineal theory. The multilineal theory emerged during the 20th century to change the ethnocentric assumption of unilinear theory of social development. The school of thought was developed by German-born anthropologist Franz Boas. Multilinear evolution is a concept which accounts for diversity. It is essentially means identification of different sequential pattern for different culture or types of culture. This theory holds that change can occur in several ways and that it does not inevitably lead in the same direction. Theorists of this persuasion recognize that human culture has evolved along a number of lines. Cyclical theory. In the cyclical theory, social change is cyclical in nature, that is, it involves repetition. From the first stage to the second, third, it will come back to the first stage. The change proceeds like a pendulum of a clock in which various stages return again and again. The theorist who gave us the cyclical theory is Toynbee. History of all cultures shows that they have passed through different stages of rise and fall. Every society faces challenges, at first challenges posed by the environment, later challenges forced from internal and external enemies. The nature of response determines the society's fate. The achievement of civilization consists of successful response to the challenges. So, that is what is social change in a cyclical manner, that each society has certain challenges, it develops certain ways in which to face the challenge, and once the challenge is solved, it tends to give rise to another kind of a challenge, and again there is a kind of a solution to that problem. So, there is a constant shift from one stage to the other. Then we also have Spengler's destiny of civilization. Spengler, in his book The Decline of the West, it was published in 1918, pointed out that the fate of civilization was a matter of destiny. Each civilization is like a biological organism and has similar life cycle, birth, maturity, age and death. So, the society would actually evolve, it would mature and then ultimately come to an end. Modern Western society is in the last stage, that is the old age, and is entering a period of decay. So, we try to understand there is so many of wars, there is so much of conflict, there is so much of negativity around, that it has forced thinkers to try to understand the society is almost facing an age of or a stage of breakdown. Then we have the theory of Sorokin. Sorokin proposed that civilization alternate or fluctuate between two cultural extremes, the sensate and the ideational. The sensate culture stresses those things which can be perceived directly by the senses. It is practical, hedonistic, sensual and materialistic. Ideational culture emphasizes those things which can be perceived only by the mind. The principle of immanent change is the natural tendency of a society's structure to swing back and forth between ideational and sensate culture. Then we have the conflict theory. The conflict theory is again a theory which will talk about the limited resources and individual getting into a kind of difference in terms of conflict with each other in terms of access to that resource. A society wealthy and powerful ensures status quo in which social practices and institutions favorable to continue change. So, if we have tried to understand Karl Marx theory in the previous slide, we see Karl Marx theory is also a theory of a conflict, and the conflict is taking place between those who own means of production, those who are the capitalist class or the ruling class, and the conflict takes place because the ruling class is going to appropriate the labor of the working class. So, a conflict takes place between the haves and the have-nots, or in other words between the capitalist and the working class. So, and that is because of the because of the limited access to the available resources, and two, because of exploitation and denial of certain rights to the one group. Then we also have a functionalist theory. The functionalist theory in sociology tries to explain any institution, any process in terms of the contribution that it makes towards the maintenance of a society. They believe that society, like human body, is balanced system of institution, and each part of a society or each institution of the society has a different function to maintain, and they do that perform that function to maintain the balance of the society. The functionalists see society as a homeostatic system. Homeostatic system is a system which consists of the parts related to each other. So, the society is made up of large number of parts, but there is a continuity between each part, and one part contributes towards the existence of the other. The normal state of a society is one of equilibrium. Because society is an open society, it is usually a dynamic state or a state of near equilibrium. Society change as it seeks to integrate conditions which act upon it. The changes, however, are piecemeal and are very gradual. The purpose of these changes is to bring society to a place of equilibrium. And one of the functionalist theory to give us the theory of social change was Talcott Parsons. He presented an equilibrium model of social change. For Talcott Parsons, society is always in a natural state of equilibrium. Equilibrium, that there is a kind of a balance, and he defined equilibrium or a society as an equal balance of opposing forces. So, the equilibrium or a balance will be achieved when there are two different kind of forces on the two sides of the fulcrum. Gradual change is both necessary and desirable, and typically stems from such things as population growth, technological advances, economic changes and other changes. Any sudden social change disrupts this equilibrium. So, for Talcott Parsons, social change was not welcome because he wanted a society which was in equilibrium, and the moment change took place, that equilibrium would be disturbed. To prevent this from happening, the other parts of society must make appropriate adjustment if one part of society sees a certain kind of a change. The last theory is the deterministic theory of social change. There are certain forces or natural both which bring about. So, deterministic theory implies that what are the factors which are permanently responsible for change in a society. It is not reason or intellectual, but the presence of certain forces and circumstances which determine the course of social change. With the passage of time, society is deteriorating, and from happiness we are advancing toward a dissatisfied society. So, there are a lot of theory in sociology which are talking about the current society in terms of a risk society, vulnerable society, precarious society. So, there is a kind of a sense that people have progressed, people have developed, but many a time it has also led to a kind of continuity of certain parts of the structure which is actually causing certain kind of disbalance. Sumner and Keller gave us deterministic theory and insisted that social change is automatically determined by economic factors. So, they were more or less influenced by Karl Marx's theory of economy, and argued that it is conscious effort and rational planning with little chance to effect change unless and until Fogways and Moores are ready for it. So, the society has to be ready to accept certain kind of a change, else it would be a temporary phenomena and would not be enough to describe it as a part of a social change. There are large number of agents of social change, teachers, family, church, political leaders, which contribute in different manners in kind of, the family is the first institutions where people learn values, norms and so it can bring about a change because by teaching the new generation of children new values and new norms. The school or the teachers also tell us about the changes that is taking place in the society, similarly religious leaders and political leaders. So, we try to see that in this lecture, I have tried to understand what is the process of social change, looked into the several factors leading to social change, tried to understand the theory which is important for us, or the way in which a large number of sociological thinkers have contributed to understanding what is social change in modern society. With this note, I come to an end of today's lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for giving us this session. Friends, to write to us, you can connect us through info.cec@nic.in. This is the ID through which you can give your feedback as well as post your questions. We are taking your leave with the promise that we are going to meet again soon. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you once again.
Thank you.